We've got another great session to hop into today. We've got Randy Wilburn with Encourage, Build, Grow. Randy essentially is a podcasting guru, probably self-taught. I think most podcasters are self-taught, but you've got that in your blood, though. So I'll introduce Randy as someone who's worked with Zweig Group for a long time, all the way back in the '90s through today. He's an accomplished author, speaker, consultant, trainer, and business coach. And he's also one of the nation's leading experts on a variety of topics to specifically do with AEC firms. So let's give Randy our attention. Let's find out how we can make our firms better, more exposed through things like a podcast. I think Randy's organic story of his own Encourage, Build, Grow should be inspiring to you guys and what we can put together. So I'll hand it over to Randy and let him take it away.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate it. It's good to see you as always. And Olivia, thank you for everything that you've done to help get this together. And I'm just really excited. I have spoken to so many people that have taken different programs from Elevate AEC, and the feedback has been tremendous. So I'm excited. And it's nothing like something like a pandemic to happen to cause us to rethink how we deliver and present information. And I think Zweig Group has done an amazing job of corralling some great minds, some great thinkers from around the world, around the United States, to pour into all of these design firm leaders and owners and employees and people that are trying to make a difference in our society. So thank you guys so much. I want to get right into this because I want to talk about a topic that I'm sure a lot of you are at least remotely familiar with. You've either seen what a podcast looks like or you've heard it. You know people that listen to podcasts ad nauseum, or you are one of those people like myself. And so today I really want to take some time to talk about the podcasting your way to brand and thought leadership. When I originally spoke to Jamie Claire about this, her thought was, what could we do to help design firms figure out how they position themselves from a voice perspective to share their story with the widest audience possible? And I said, well, obviously podcasting will do that for you. And we have practiced that here. And I'm sorry, but I put myself into the third person by including myself at Zweig Group still, even though I don't technically work there, but I consult with Zweig Group on a regular basis, and they're family. So we're gonna have a family conversation today, but we're gonna focus on how do you podcast your way to brand, right? From a marketing perspective and thought leadership, because I believe that podcasting actually serves a twofold process for any organization, for any entity, but especially for design firms, because there is so much amazing information. There's so many amazing projects that you guys do, and just the stories are endless. And so I want to kind of break that down and get you to think differently about why you might want to start a podcast for your organization. And I'm going to start moving through these slides so that you can see that. So this is our agenda. This is what we're going to go through. I want to try to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. And of course, you'll have all my contact information at the end. Should you need anything else, and I've got a little extra bonus for you at the end, I'll make sure that you know how to reach me and we can answer those questions. But we're going to talk about a brief history of podcasting. Some of the podcasting stats for 2020. I actually just got some that just came hot off the presses. I got them right here on my phone, and I'll be sharing those with you. Bringing your podcast idea to life, because I know a lot of you are saying, yeah, I know about podcasting, but how do we make it applicable to what we do at XYZ design firm? And so I'm going to talk about that, your why behind creating a podcast, what the avatar or ideal listener looks like, what type of structure you should consider, the type of show you might want to put on. And then I want to get you not to obsess about the equipment or the technology. I know it can seem burdensome, or it can seem like, man, I already got enough on my plate, Randy. Now you want to add podcasting to it? Trust me, just hang with me for an hour and I'm going to break this all down. Then we're going to talk about some of the next steps that you should take in order to undertake this process of creating a podcast, something that is really, unique to your organization. It allows you to take your thumbprint, your DNA of your company, your company's culture, and what makes you special in the marketplace, and share that with the world, because everybody's got a hero's journey. And I want to help you figure out how to share yours. So, the first thing I want to do is talk about a brief history of podcasting, because I think for me to kind of give you all that this whole topic entails, we have to look at the history of how it got started and where we are today. I think you'll appreciate the numbers that we're currently now seeing, and I think it will make a huge difference for you when it comes to just kind of having a better understanding of where things stand. So let's just look at that and just take a closer look and see what's what. So the first thing I want to say is, let's talk about 2004. That was the year that a gentleman named Adam Curry, who along with a guy named Dave Weiner, were the inventors of the medium of podcasting. Adam and Dave came together. They had been sharing audio files, and they wanted to figure out a better, more efficient way to share those files over the interwebs. And so they came up with how you would encapsulate what is basically an RSS feed that would then take the audio file and make it portable enough to share and distribute across the internet. And that's when podcasting was born. The technology was there. They kind of cobbled things together and created something really special. And for a lot of you, you've probably heard their name Adam Curry before, and that's simply because he is the same Adam Curry that, for those of us that, I'm going to date myself now, go back to the early 80s when we used to come home from school and watch MTV. He was one of the VJs along with Nina Blackwood, and I forget all the other guys' names, but the bottom line was, in the early 80s, everybody was part of the MTV generation, and Adam Curry was one of those VJs that you would tune in and listen to, and he looks a lot different than he did back then. But regardless, he's always had music and audio at his heart. And it's almost appropriate that a guy that was at the beginning of the video and online and television music revolution would be a part of creating or having a hand in bringing podcasting to the world. So I think that's kind of cool. Now, the next thing is, in 2005, we saw podcasting continue to grow with President George Bush pushing out his weekly address via podcast. He was the first president to do that. And so he can lay claim to that distinction. And that's when people started to consume the medium, and it really made a difference. And then if you think about 2006, Steve Jobs at that time basically demonstrated to the world in a keynote how to record a podcast using GarageBand, which is a built-in software that comes in the Apple operating system. GarageBand is actually an outstanding tool. I still use it today in some editing purposes, but the bottom line is that in 2006, Steve Jobs kind of took what Adam Curry and Dave Weiner did back in '04 and said, hey, this is something for the masses to do. And oh, by the way, this product actually comes in all of our computers. And GarageBand still rules the roost today. But there are other options out there, and I'll talk about those a little later in the session. So just bear with me. I just want to kind of go through this history piece. Now, the next thing is that I'm going to jump ahead to 2013 because I don't want to bore you with a bunch of statistics for everything, but I do want to make my case. So in 2013, Apple announced that 1 billion podcast subscribers. That was huge because those 1 billion subscriptions were held up with 250,000 unique podcasts across over 100 languages. And so there was more than 8 million episodes had been published on iTunes store at that time, according to Apple. And so that was a big deal. And that's when we kind of realized in 2013 that, man, this is actually going to take on a life of its own. And, you know, even for me, I actually started podcasting in 2008. So I've been doing this for some time, but I can remember even 2009, 2010, podcasting wasn't as big as you would have thought, even after only 7 or 8 years. But by 2013, almost a decade after Adam Curry invented it with Dave Weiner, you know, it started to really take on a life of its own. But what I want to do, though, right now is I want to jump in our DeLorean and I want to fast forward 7 years to 2020 today, because a lot has happened and a lot has changed in the podcasting space in 7 short years. So you think about that, I mean, it's just amazing, the technology in terms of what it's done and how it operates and all that good stuff. There's all kinds of interesting things out there. So let's just take a look at what has happened since and what is happening in 2020. So the first observation, and this came out from Edison Research and Triton Digital, they approximately 169 million Americans listened to online audio in the last week, and they spend an average of over 15 hours doing so. I don't know about you guys, but I listen to a lot of podcasts, and these are things that really they just work for me. I mean, I get a lot of information that way. I still obviously read a ton. I listen to Audible as well, but a lot of my consumption of information are audio podcasts. I listen to The Daily. I listen to Up Next from NPR pretty much every day. Those are my staple go-to podcasts for my news. And then I have a lot of other special interest podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis as well, that actually inform a lot of the work that I do, even some of the consulting in this space, because this stuff is still so brand new. So, you know, there are a lot of people out there that are kind of learning on the job, but they, you know, there's something new each day to learn about this medium and how you can use it and leverage it to your advantage. And that's the thing I love about podcasting. The next thing I want to talk about is monthly podcast consumers grew by 16% year over year, cresting to 100 million Americans for the first time in 2020. And so I think that's significant as well, because a third of our US population are listening to podcasts on a regular basis, and that number is just going to continue to rise. And then the next thing is that when you think of it, Apple has always had a hand in podcasting from the very beginning. So it would be appropriate that in just this past April of 2020, the 1 million podcast show registered itself on Apple Podcasts. And that was huge. And I think it's significant because it's right when the pandemic started. And if you look at some of the statistics that just go back a few months before that, at the end of 2019, you were seeing anywhere from 25,000 to 40,000 new podcasts each month. In January and February of 2020, there were around 48 to 50,000 new shows on Apple Podcasts. And these numbers jumped in March. Of course, we're all stuck at the house. We're all trying to figure out new ways to do business, exchange ideas and information. And so, of course, that number would jump. And in March, there were more than 63,000 new shows added to the Apple Podcast platform. And in April, there were just under 70,000, and that's where this data point ends. But I think it's just important to recognize this. And this milestone, while it was a long time coming for podcasting, it took about 15 years to hit 1 million shows. It's only going to grow. And the reason why I say that is because of what I'm going to share with you on this next slide. There are 31 million channels on YouTube. Video and audio kind of go hand in hand with each other, but there are some unique differences. And I really want you to think about the fact that there are 31 million YouTube channels. So there's still a lot of room when you think about podcasting. It's still early. Each and every one of you watching this video has an opportunity. You have a story to tell. Your company has a story to tell. There's so much that you can offer that, I mean, you know, you'd be crazy not to throw your hat in the ring and try something to figure out, how do we tell our story? How do we put ourselves in the crosshairs of all of those listeners out there that are consuming this audio on a regular basis? So just kind of think about that. 1 million versus 31 million. It's going to continue to grow. So, and a couple of years ago, Chad Kleinens, the CEO of Zweig Group, and I went to a HubSpot marketing conference in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'll never forget it. We had a great trip, ate a lot of seafood, but the thing that I really enjoyed is that Chad and I got a front row seat to hear Seth Godin talk about marketing and how it's going to impact and inform how we do business moving forward in the future. And so when somebody like Seth says podcasting is the new blogging, you should take note of what this guy's saying. He's the same author of the book Purple Cow, How Interesting Things Get Noticed, and he has a lot of common sense when it comes to marketing and the practice of marketing and how firms deal with that. And I just think it's, you know, it's worth considering. I mean, remember back in the late 90s, everybody and their mother was blogging, right? That was the thing. Everybody wanted to blog. Now, the new thing is to say, hey, have you heard my podcast? And people are sharing their podcasts. So this whole podcasting obsession kind of mirrors what things were like in the early days of blogging, and it's only going to gain traction as a viable alternative for the transfer of information of all sorts. Plus, it's a medium that you as the creator can really control with a finer sense of granularity than sometimes even what you can do with video. So keep that in mind. And there are a lot of options that we'll go over throughout the course of this training that will, you know, have you thinking about, oh, I could do this or I could do that. You know, that would help you out. So I think it's just worth thinking about as we move forward. But podcasting is the new blogging. Sorry about that. And so the next thing I wanted to mention to you is this little device here. I wonder how many of you actually have a smart speaker in your home. The Amazon Alexa has kind of taken off on its own. And of course, you know, just take Amazon out of the equation and think of the device itself, what it does, and how it impacts our life. I have a couple of these in the house. I get my daily updates. I find out what my schedule is every morning. She reminds me to drink water. She tells me what the weather's going to be. And she will also play my favorite podcast episodes every morning that I listen to as I make breakfast for the kids as they get ready for school. So Alexa does all of that. The global smart speaker market is going to reach $15.6 billion by 2025. It's currently at 7.1 billion in 2020. And it's not so much significant that the dollar amount, but just look at the expected growth in the smart speaker market. Now, for some understanding of how this relates to what we're talking about, 50%, 50% of all searches will be voice searches by the end of this year. Okay, and that's per ComScore. And what they've also said is by 2025, 100% of all search will be voice. And that's huge because I'm using it now. I look up a ton of things on Alexa. I have a Google Home player as well, so I can use that. And that actually queries a lot of really great information. I don't have an Apple HomePod, which is another smart speaker. There's so many different options out there. They're putting them in cars. Buick has cars enabled with the Amazon Alexa built into the Buick. So you can be listening in your home to a podcast, maybe from one of your firms. After you listen to this show, you guys decide to create a podcast and somebody is listening to it, a potential client in their house. As soon as they get into their car, if they have one of those beautiful Amazon enabled Buicks, will just resume play as soon as they get into the car. So what they're trying to do, what Amazon and all of these smart speaker makers are trying to do, is to seamlessly integrate how you live your life with how you consume information. So you can go from the shower to your kitchen, to the car, to the office, and consume this information, which is one of the reasons why I tell people podcasting is the place to be. Because if you have great stories to share, which we all do, that's not a trick statement. Everybody has an amazing story to share. And since we all have amazing stories to share, we need to just figure out how to share them through this medium of voice. And it will make a difference for you in the long run. So, I think it's just something that, you need to be continually thinking about. Plus, the other piece of this with regard to search is that now in Google is indexing podcasts because they hear the podcast and the AI creates a transcript. And through that transcript, if one isn't already created by the podcast creator, then Google indexes their own transcript of every episode. That way, when you do search, you can find information that may be shared on a particular podcast. And again, I don't want to get all into the sausage making of the technology itself. I think it's important just to understand it, but there are so many applications and ways that you can use this. Even for me, I have a couple of podcasts. Of course, I help start and run the Zweig Letter podcast for Zweig Group, but I also have two of my own. One is Encourage, Build, Grow, and the other is I Am Northwest Arkansas. And I Am Northwest Arkansas focuses on the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in the Ozarks. I've already done 90 episodes of that, and I'm about on 20 or 22 for Encourage, Build, Grow. And honestly, they've taken on a life of their own, especially I Am Northwest Arkansas. What was at once a hobby is now a money-making concern, but that wasn't why I created it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the next section. So I just want you to think about that. And for those of you that are watching this after the fact, I'd love to learn what are some of your favorite podcasts. Just think about what are you listening to right now. Just ask yourself, take a second and write down or think the podcast that actually write it down. Write down 2 or 3 of your favorite podcasts if you actually listen to them. And then what I would like you to do is I would like you to give me or just write down 1 or 2 word answers as to why you like the podcast so much. Now, just take that and keep that information for yourself and let that inform how you move forward with your decision making as to whether or not you actually create a podcast yourself. But I would make a claim to you that you really need to think long and hard about creating a podcast and figuring out a way to share the information that you have to share within your company with the widest audience possible. So that's just something to think about, and we'll go through more of that in a second. I just want you to just process that and think about why you even listen to podcasts. Some of you I know like true crime. Some of you are news junkies like me. And then just some of you like to hear interesting stories. There's some Joe Rogan fans out there. There's some people that like to listen to Dan Carlin on history. His episodes are like 6 hours long, but they are riveting. I listen to them a lot when I'm on long road trips. Not that I've been doing many of those during the pandemic, but the bottom line is that that's another way for you to take in this information. And there's so much available to each of us, and it's just really a matter of whatever floats your boat. And so I tell people all the time, don't think about just what you would listen to. You don't know what your audience would listen to until you start thinking about A, who is your audience, and B, how do I reach them? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that so that you can get a better idea of how that works and what you should be doing. So let's move on to the next thing. So here are the top 10 podcasts as of September 2020. The Daily from the New York Times, which is the #1 podcast in the world. It is, Joe Rogan may make more money from his podcast, but The Daily is the widest consumed podcast out there. And so I think it's, just think about that. NPR News Now up first from NPR. NPR, rules the roost when it comes to podcasting, because all they've done is take their quality radio programming and transferred a lot of it over or repurposed it into podcasting, which you've now found everybody does. Every ESPN talking head that has a show on ESPN, they strip that out and create a podcast from it. Every radio program, every radio talk show, every radio sports show typically will take a couple of their hours from whatever their show is and create a podcast episode for it and put that out daily. And it allows for time shifted listening at the convenience of the listener, not when you want to share information with them. And that's huge, right? Because think of how DVRs allow you to record your favorite shows like This Is Us and I don't know. I'm just picking up a one that's very popular right now. But you don't have to come home on Tuesday nights or Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock, whenever it's on your time, wherever you live, and watch it. You can watch it whenever, when it's convenient. And because a lot of you in the design industry are working all the time and are always so busy, just that time shifted approach to your listening and consumption habits of this type of material, it's just a real benefit. So think about how that would benefit your audience with the podcast that you create. But you see the long list of all the different shows that are up here that really are quite impressive. And these shows are very, very cool. And you got Call Her Daddy, Stuff You Should Know by our iHeartRadio, This American Life, Dateline NBC, Pardon My Take from Barstool Sports, and Radio Lab from WNYC Studios. So if you don't listen to any of those, I would encourage you to look some of them up. check them out and see what an amazing show that is one of the top 10 sounds like. And that'll give you an idea of what the kind of work that you need to do to put your podcast out there. But I don't want you to focus on, well, I'm never going to be a top 10 show as a design firm podcast or whatever choose your niche podcast that we're going to focus on. Don't worry about that. What I want you to worry about is finding something that allows you to easily press record as often as possible. Something that really moves the needle for you, for your organization, something that you think is like our best kept secret that we're going to share with everybody. Just be focused on that and do a good job with that and let everything else work itself out. So, how do you bring your podcast ideas to life? And that's, something that I really want you to think about when we talk about podcasts and how we bring these ideas to life. I mean, it's really not as hard as you think, but you have to put some work in with regard to that. So let's kind of take a look at that, and I'll share with you some anecdotes of what I did to bring my podcasting ideas to life. And so the next thing I want to mention is the fact that, passion. You have to have a why to do your podcast. And are you hoping to extend your brand externally to the world, or do you just want to share information internally to your team? These are things that you have to think of when you create your podcast, but you have to create something that gets the juices flowing. I cannot stress this enough. You've got to have a why behind your podcast. And I'm going to walk you through a number of different variables that you can consider, things that you can focus on in terms of creating your podcast. But there needs to be a big why. And along with the big why, there needs to be an avatar. You need to have a listening audience. You need to decide who your audience will be. You got to work on your avatar, what that ideal listener looks like. The more time you spend considering your audience, the better off you will be, and the easier it will be for you to come up with content for your podcast. One of the reasons that I did the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast is that when I left working full-time at Zweig Group a couple of years ago, I decided to meet people in Northwest Arkansas. I didn't know anybody here because I'd spent so much time on the road trying to keep up with Jamie Claire Kaiser and my platinum status with my fill-in-the-blank airline. And I'm being funny about that, but yeah, we traveled a lot, and she still does. I don't know how she does it, but she is a road warrior extraordinaire. But the bottom line is I didn't know anybody in Northwest Arkansas. So I said, you know what? I'm going to meet people here. I created the podcast and I went out. Mark Zweig helped me meet a bunch of people. He opened several doors and I took it from there. I'm 90 episodes in and I'm not looking back. The podcast comes out every week. As I said earlier, it focuses on the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in the Ozarks. So while that's a broad category of topics, it is a very small niche because my focus is Northwest Arkansas, and there's basically 4 major cities that make up that area. Bentonville, where Walmart is located, Rogers, where JB Hunt is located, Springdale, where Tyson Chicken is located, and then of course the U of A, which is in Fayetteville, which is where I live. So you think about those 4 cities. That's my world with the podcast, and I've created an ecosystem of content and information that really get people flowing. It has taken on a life of its own. I've got people from all walks of life, all demographics that listen to the podcast. and have now enabled me to create actual income from the podcast through sponsorships. And that's a whole nother conversation, and not one that we're going to have in this episode. But if any of you want to talk about ways you could spin out some sponsorships, Zweig Group has done it with the Zweig Letter podcast. There are ways to monetize your podcast too. I'm more concerned with focusing on the marketing and branding aspect of your podcast as part of your omni-channel process of pushing information out there. So I don't want you to get caught up on how can we make money from this. This is more of a line item in your marketing budget that you need to have in order to create information to share on the voice platform. And that's kind of where we want to go with this. So then the next thing I want you to think about from that is, since there's two different ways that you can do this. The first is you can just create an external podcast. Okay, you could extend the brand of the company through a marketing podcast. You can just continue to share a lot of information you're already sharing through other mediums and other avenues, but share it through voice. You can also tell your founder's story. That's really important, and it's something that I encourage people to do all the time. You can tell the story of your projects. Every project has one. Now, I want to mention this because I know some people had brought this to my attention before, and I'm fully aware of this. I really want you to be thinking about this podcast from the 25,000 foot level, not suggesting that you run out and start recording stuff right away. Of course, you always have to ask permission when you're telling stories about clients, if they want to be included in it, if they don't want to be included in it. There's actually still ways to tell stories about projects that you do, even if a client is non-committal or doesn't want their name mentioned. You can still tell the essence of a story without that in most cases. But I always want you to respect the rights of others to be a part of this process or to not be a part. So you always want to dot your I's and cross your T's when it comes to that. I'm not suggesting that anybody tells stories that they don't have the right to tell. So just put that caveat out there. The next thing is that you can create a strong recruitment and retention message. Listen, Gen Z and even younger millennials consume podcasts at a high amount. And Gen Z is very agnostic about how they get their information. So you never know how you might be reaching some of these young people, which is why, in my mind, a podcast is a great way to get that information out there and to tell your story. I was just recently doing an episode with a person for the Zweig Letter podcast. And we were talking about some of the bells and whistles that set them apart from a culture standpoint. And as I listened to it, I said, man, if I was a young kid in an MEP program in school, I'm about to graduate, this would be the kind of company I would want to work for because of the stories that they're telling me, because they're reciting how all of their young people get to have interactions with the client, how they go through professional development programs, and how this company has created its own internal university. These are things that go beyond just slapping them on a brochure or sticking them on a static website. I got a newsflash for you. People don't consume that information the way they used to. And people are consuming information in bite-sized chunks and in mediums and formats that are convenient to them. So just keep that in mind. The next thing is that a good external podcast can offer industry-wide professional development. If you are an expert in a vertical market that you serve, you should be doing professional development training via podcasting to share the information that you know. It's not that it's proprietary, and if it is, of course, you don't have to share that if you don't want to, but I would share on the bigger picture, because maybe there are other firms where people aren't getting that kind of professional development or information, or maybe you stand head and shoulders above a lot of your peer competitors and you have some great information. You can leverage that to just share it with other people, because as I always say, sharing is caring. But the other thing is that it can also potentially help you with recruitment. and it will help you with retention. And then finally, you can connect with and involve community stakeholders. For those of you that work in the public sector, if you work with elected officials, if you work with different leaders like a county manager or something like that, this gives you a chance to interview some of these people and do it in a way where you're not asking for anything, but you want to connect with them to learn more information. Listen, everybody likes to talk about themselves, talk about what they're doing, and everybody likes a platform to share their story. The thing I love about the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast is that every time I ask someone to be on the podcast, they say yes. Same thing with the Zweig Letter podcast. I have never been turned down for an interview by anyone at the highest heights of our industry to entry-level folks. And I've interviewed everybody in between. And that's the other thing. Don't discriminate. Don't just assume that I need to only interview seasoned individuals that have been around forever and a day. I interviewed a young man that was 4 years out of college, and one of his episodes that I did with him was one of the highest regarded episodes that I've ever shared. One, because one design firm leader told me that it really informed him of the thinking of this younger generation. He is at the cusp of Gen Z and millennial. He's actually a millennial, but just his thinking and what he shared in that 45-minute discussion was very enlightening for this firm owner. And I actually heard from several other people that said the same thing. So don't just say, oh, well, I only want the best of the best or the oldest of the oldest. That's great, but there's a lot of young people that could really talk you in circles and enlighten you on some things. So don't discriminate in that way. Now, let's look at some of the internal podcast stuff. And yes, the long and short of it is you can make it private too. Okay. So I know a lot of you saying, well, I'd love to do an internal podcast, but I don't want to slap it up there on Apple and then have other people listening to some of our highly regarded information. And that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am saying to you is that you can create a private podcast, and I can walk you through that. I mean, with anything that I'm talking about here, if you need clear direction, clear advice, I'll be giving you all of my contact information at the end. And I'll walk you through anything that you need your hand held with, or if you have questions on. That's what I'm here for. And honestly, that's why I even agreed to do this, because I just think it's important that we set design firm leaders, and especially those in the marketing departments, up with a successful podcasting platform where and when possible. So just keep that in mind. Again, with an internal podcast, you should be telling the founder's story, especially if you're a large firm and this founder can't do management by walking around. Well, you can have this individual record something and memorialize it in a podcast and just share it with your team. It can serve a number of purposes. So that's one option that you have. The next is regular company messages from leadership that you can share with everybody far and wide. A lot of these first two really work well for larger companies. I have a client that has over 1,000 people, and they're doing podcasting just to share regular company messages with everybody. And it's just in addition to sending out email, because here's the dirty little secret. A lot of people don't read their emails. I'm going to repeat that. Not everybody reads all their emails. Trust me, most of us are swimming in an inbox of emails. And a lot of times it's nice to be able to have to listen to information in an alternative way. And podcasting certainly fits that criteria. The next thing is, again, like the first time on the external podcast, you can tell your story of your project. Every project has one. You can create a strong recruitment and retention message. And this is really important because this is where you can leverage and tell the stories about people that have successfully joined your firm and are doing amazing things with your company, and you want to share that with everybody far and wide. And so I would encourage you to try to explore this and see what this looks like. You could do employee onboarding and training for your HR department. I'm sure your HR folks, because they talk to their blue in their face anyway. The bottom line is that you could create podcasting and share a lot of internal information that's germane to helping people that just joined your firm have a quality onboarding experience. And it's a great way to kickstart the training too, especially now in the pandemic, the way things are. And again, people are going to be watching this later on once we've gotten a vaccine and we've kind of pushed past this. Again, you could be using this for onboarding and training, and it will make a difference whether you're dealing with a remote workforce or not. And then, of course, professional development and knowledge transfer. And I want to stop on this for a second because the knowledge transfer piece is huge. I think we can all agree that this industry isn't getting any younger. We're actually getting older. The graying of the design industry finds us looking at a lot of really sharp, bright individuals with years of experience under their belt. And we are not capturing their knowledge and transferring it to the next generation in an efficient way. And I believe podcasting can be one way to do that. It can allow you to memorialize some things and some stories that just, really make a difference. And I think about all the stories I learned when I first worked with Carter and Burgess. My first stint at Zweig Group, Mark had me work directly with Jerry Allen. I was entrusted. It was one of the largest projects that Zweig, White, and Associates had at that time. And I can remember just all of the knowledge and information that Jerry Allen shared with me, a lot of his senior hiring managers shared with me. And it was invaluable. And I also think about all the stories that Mark would tell about Jerry Allen's, trailblazing of M&A, which allowed Carter and Burgess to grow from a sleepy, Fort Worth, Metroplex, multidiscipline design firm to a national juggernaut that was eventually purchased by Jacobs. So, it's these stories that live to inform people what makes company A special, what makes company B special. So these are things that you could be thinking about. And there are so many ways for you to push this information internally. And if you're adamant that, Randy, this has to be private, we can make it private, and I can help you with that if you need some help. And, we can certainly talk about that offline. So please feel free to reach out to me. At the end, I'll give you my contact information, how you can reach me, and we can talk about ways that I can help you with that. And then finally, sales and business development. And that kind of goes without saying, but, every marketer could use an extra hand. Every marketer could use an extra ear. And again, you just need to be omni-channel with your marketing and business development efforts. And what I mean by omni-channel is that, yes, you're using social media. Yes, you're using email. You're using your website. You're using every platform that's available to you. You're pushing out stuff on video on YouTube. And then you're going to say, you know what? Well, we need voice is that next area. And the beauty about when people do videos is that we can always strip audio from video and make it multi-purpose, meaning that you could use it on the video side. And if it's really good audio and somebody's telling really good stories, we can strip that and repurpose it within a podcast as well. So these are things that you need to really think about, because it will, you probably already have a ton of information. Like if a bunch of you have done videos and in a lot of programs like that over the last few years, I can show you how to take some of that information and strip it and repurpose it for podcasting, which would be nice. But then my encouragement would be, if you have a lot of videos and stuff like that, you would marry that to a fresh approach to a podcast and repurpose the things that are of the highest value, because if they were good in video, they'll be good in audio. Even the things that require a lot of description, you'd be surprised how you can paint pictures in audio that people really resonate with. And I know it comes up, and some of you watching this are going to be thinking, well, Randy, design professionals are very visual people. How do we overcome that with voice? And the long and short of it is, there are ways to be very descriptive when you do voice interviews, when you do podcast interviews. So don't get hung up on that. Well, I can't show my beautiful model. I can't show this. You can always link to it in the show notes. You can talk about it. You can talk about an amazing charrette that you did and what the end result was. And again, it's just a different format for you to exchange ideas and to share information. So that's, something that you need to think about. And then the next thing, and I already put the slide up because I want you to be thinking about that, is what type of show are you going to do? Are you going to do a solo show? Are you going to do an interview-based show? Is it co-hosted? Will there be an ensemble of several people within your organization that will be part of it? It really just depends. Probably the most popular format for podcasting are interview formats. And so that's something that, you could consider and possibly try. It's really not as hard as you think. I'd probably say the most difficult show, unless you're really good on your feet, is a solo show. You can do it, but if you do a solo show, I would probably encourage you to consider doing a short form show, something that's under 10 minutes, right to the point. You can almost script it and just go from there. A lot of shows can be medium form, which is 20 to 30 minutes. And then, of course, you've got the long form, which is 30 to 60 plus. And as I said, most of my podcasts tend to be long form, so they're 30 to 60. Then you've got like Joe Rogan long, which is like 3.5 hours. And nobody's suggesting that you do that. Those are more lifestyle-like podcasts. I don't know that there are any highly technical podcasts that spend that much time focusing on that. So that's something to consider. And let's look at a quick case study, because I really want you guys I want to drive this home for you. And the case study I want to talk about, of course, is the Zweig Letter podcast. Here's how this started. I came back to Zweig Group in 2013, 2014, and then eventually I sat down with Mark and said, man, we need to do a podcast. I thought it would be great to do something based on the Zweig Letter. I said, man, why don't you just read your articles on the podcast? That's what we did. It got rave reviews. Everybody loved it. After a while, I was like, oh, this is a little long in the tooth. Let's just try to tweak it some. How about I take whatever articles you write and I'll interview you based on the articles that you talked about? Woo, great as well, right? And then we said, you know what? Let's look at all the most popular articles that other authors publish on the Zweig Letter. Let's interview them. Another ace in the hole. And so we basically, we iterated it and ideated from the beginning version to what it is now, to where we started talking about industry trends, marketing and business development. And of course, we have always featured audio from different events that Zweig Group runs, like the Principals Academy, at the time, Hot Firm when they have it, which is now Elevate, which is this program that you're participating in now, although it's virtual. The bottom line is it has morphed over the years, and after 177 episodes, we have hundreds, if not thousands of hours of, well, no, not thousands, but several hundred hours of audio content of all manner that is accessible online. It's there in perpetuity until somebody blows up the Apple servers, which that's never going to happen, Lord willing. But the bottom line is this information is out there and it's never going anywhere. In 15 years, Mark will be able to share podcast episodes that we did 20 years prior to his great grandkids or his grandkids. So I'm just giving him grandkids. But the bottom line is this information is going to have staying power, and you'd be surprised how it'll be used in the future. I don't think any of us really know, but I think memorializing our stories in sound and in voice has a long-term effect for your organization. And so I would encourage people to really be thinking about that. Now, you might be saying, okay, Grandy, this is great, but who else is doing this? There's a lot of companies out there that are doing podcasts. So a couple that come to mind is one podcast called The Distance from Basecamp. Basecamp is one of the largest project management softwares out there. It's not a project management software for design firms. It's just a project management software. It's actually really good. It's one that I've used for years. And they have some great stories. The other one is Open Account with Sushin Pak that talks about everything related to personal finance. And they're a smaller bank that created this podcast, and their deposits rose astronomically after this podcast came out because it really resonated with a lot of young people, and they opened up accounts because of this podcast. The other one that I always like to talk about is Lip Stories from Sephora, which basically took the idea that, hey, those of you that know and have shopped with your wives or your significant others in the malls, you go into every mall, there's a Sephora there. They sell all kinds of things for women, and they have a couple things for guys, but mostly for women. They said, you know what? Let's tell really cool stories of women entrepreneurs that are super successful. And so they don't even talk about their product. They just highlight really successful women entrepreneurs. Now, women, that's Sephora's demographic. So they are branding themselves with this idea of entrepreneurship. And so it could resonate, and it has resonated with a lot of women that maybe didn't normally go to Sephora, but they go to Sephora because it really, really is something that they identify with. So that's a perfect example of how podcasting's being used by companies. The next, hold on one second. Sorry about that. All right, so I lost my little presentation there for a hot second. Gotta love technology. There's always something going on. All right, so let's move on to the next slide here. And Damon John, Rise and Grind, ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter teamed up with Damon John, and they have a really cool podcast, and he tells some really amazing founder stories, and they talk about what it means to have your own business. Obviously, having a business means that you sometimes have to hire people, so they've kind of leveraged that and leveraged Damon John's audience and have run with it. Basecamp, the folks from 37 Signals, also did another podcast called Rework, which talks about unconventional wisdom from Basecamp co-founders Jeremy Freed and other business owners there, the mistakes they've made, the things that they wish they could go back and do over. It's really cool. And then Work in Progress by Slack. Most of you know Slack, which is a very powerful software that you can use online instead of using email, and allows for a high degree of granular collaboration. So, Slack works out nicely as well, and they have a great podcast, and their whole thing with their podcast, Work in Progress, is that behind every working human, there is a story. See, there's that theme again of stories that can be told. So let's just, of course I did it again. Sorry about that. Let's just continue and walk through some of these. And then the last few I want to share with you, the McKinsey podcast from McKinsey and Company. It's a consulting firm. They have their own podcast. They talk about a lot of the challenges that their clients face, and they've broke it down into stories and into issues. So they talk about everything. The Message is another good one from GE. Yes, that GE. GE said, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to create a podcast that is a science fiction based story branded by General Electric. And that's what they did. And it was a short, 8 episodes. It tells a really great story, and it has a lot of staying power. And that was created actually a couple of years ago, and it still gets hundreds of thousands of listeners on a regular basis. And then the last one that we'll mention is Shopify Masters. And for those of you that don't know, Shopify, the company that Shopify is now, it's one of the biggest transaction companies out there for e-commerce, and it makes a huge difference. It came out of nowhere. The guy that founded Shopify was really just trying to create a better product for him to sell snowboards, and it took on a life of its own. And now with a valuation of some ungodly billions of dollars, they are right at the top of the heap when it comes to online transactions. So they have a podcast which talks about business experience, marketing inspiration from successful e-commerce entrepreneurs and experts, people that would probably use their product. And it's easy. It's actually a really good podcast. And so those are just a few of the podcasts that I would recommend that you look at, because they, kind of share some things and will give you an idea as to what you should do next, or how you should consider branding and setting your podcast up. So now let's talk about this, because I don't want you to obsess about the equipment. It's important for you to have quality equipment, but I don't want you to obsess about it, because you'll go crazy doing it, and I don't want that to happen. Obviously, you can put together something really cool with this device right here. The microphone on an iPhone is amazing. Most Android phones have really good microphones. They all come with some type of portable recorder, so you have that at your disposal, or you could have a microphone at your desk. So I don't want you to feel like the barrier to entry is too high. It's actually a lot easier than you think. And with regard to some of the other items that you could use, let's just think of it this way. You've got this Rode Lav mic, which you can put on your shirt and you can record into. I've used that with a number of the TPA events that I've done, where I've recorded what I've been saying. And then, of course, the ATR 2100 from Audio-Technica is kind of like the workhorse dynamic microphone from Audio-Technica. I've used this for years. I own like 5 of them, and they are a great microphone to have. So I would really encourage you to consider, starting somewhere simple and then building from there. And as always, I'll be more than happy to kind of walk you through some of your equipment decisions and things that you might want to do. And then when you talk about software that you can use to edit your podcast, if that's what you choose to do, then you've got GarageBand, and you also have Audacity, which are 2 very good softwares to use. Audacity works both on the Mac platform and on the Windows platform or Microsoft. And then, of course, GarageBand works with Apple. And let's see. Okay. The next thing is, this is kind of the setup that I use. That device in the middle there is a digital recorder. It's called the Zoom H6. It has 4 connections for XLR inputs, and all that means is that it can take in 4 unique mics. So I could be sitting around a table with 4 people. Here in this picture, you see 2 people sitting in the table, but I can sit with up to 4 people and record them from separate mics, which gives me separate tracks. And all that separate tracks means is that I have a lot more granularity of control over the quality of each. Like if one person, like say that woman, she's speaking in a low voice, then I can amp up her volume without messing up mine. Maybe say my volume is perfect, but hers isn't. I can control that. I can control it both on this device while I'm doing the recording, but let's say I wasn't paying attention. It's a little bit more forgiving because I have a separate track of hers. So I can, in the audio editing station, whichever one I'm using, I can gain up her volume and fix whatever it doesn't work. So there are a lot of options there. And the sound is great with this device. You get a lot of flexibility with controlling the sound gain, the volume, and this even has phantom power for microphones that need a little extra oomph, like those 2 particular microphones that are there. It works well on batteries if you're out in the field, or if it's plugged into an outlet or plugged into your computer. Now, this Zoom H6, most Zoom products are used by Hollywood. They take these out because these are very robust and the sound quality is excellent. And I could take you and show you episodes of the Zweig podcast that are recorded with that versus maybe Zoom, or I use another program called Squadcast, which gives me near studio quality recording, even if somebody I'm interviewing is virtual. So there are all kinds of options there. And I know some of you are thinking, well, Randy, if I take this back to my boss, he's going to want the most pristine show on the books. He's going to want it to sound like NPR. I can help you sound kind of like NPR. I mean, you don't have to be NPR, but I can help you. I can make sure you don't make that you're not ashamed of the final product at the end of the day. So that's something to consider, and we can certainly work with you on that down the road. The next thing is I want to talk about, once you get all your equipment in place, you got to have a place to put your podcast episodes. And of course, it requires a podcast server. You don't want to put your podcast on the server for your hosting provider for your website. That is a recipe for disaster and a hot mess. You just don't want to do that because most of those servers are not set up for the pull of information the way that these podcast servers are. So I'd highly recommend that you consider like one of these. I personally use Libsyn, I use Buzzsprout, and I have used SoundCloud, but I'm familiar with all of them and they're all fine. But if I had, I actually have some discount links for Buzzsprout and for Libsyn. They're both worth trying out. And most of these you can try out for free to see which one you would like. But you trust me when I say this, host your podcast on a podcast hosting provider, not with GoDaddy or, any of those other companies that are out there that are pure like website-based hosting providers, because that's not what you want to use. Now, the next thing is once you've hosted your podcast, you still have to send it out so that the world can listen to it. And what happens is say you sign up with a Buzzsprout or a Libsyn or any of those other hosting providers that I just shared with you, they then in turn send your RSS feed to each of these directories. iTunes is a directory, TuneIn, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, SoundCloud, FM Player, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify. They're all directories. So, the Zweig letter is listed with all of these. I can help you get listed with all these directories. A lot of the hosting providers provide internal services for that. When you set up your hosting with them, they will set up the relationship with these guys and make a seamless transaction there so that you don't have to do a whole lot. But it's not as hard as you think, and YouTube's another place where you can post your podcast on YouTube. It may be a static video there, but you can still listen to it that way. So that is an option as well. So now, a lot of you are probably saying, well, Randy, this is all great, but who in the heck are we going to get to do this? And there are a lot of different ways that you can look at this. You can either produce the podcast yourself, or find a young person in your office, or maybe someone with that's a little older, that maybe they worked in at a radio station back in the day, think college, right? And they want to rekindle that desire to get behind the microphone, or at least help to produce someone that does want to do that. It's really not as hard as you think. I have worked with design firms that have found some individuals that were interested in doing this, and it took off. So that's an option, and you can certainly do that. And I wouldn't be offended if you did, because I think podcasting has, again, it's a long-term process, but you can still get help from companies, and that's your other option, right? So you can hire a producer, you can hire someone like me that can help you with everything from podcast flow to editing, to interviewing, to ideation and editorial calendars and equipment purchasing, among other things. And I know a lot of people sit around saying, well, I'm still not sure if we have enough stuff to talk about. That's okay. We can figure it out. We can figure out the best way to deliver your podcast. I can walk you through some things to think about. You'd be surprised at the information that you have at your disposal that you probably should be sharing through a podcast. And so once we kind of ideate a little bit and walk through it and, kind of figure that out, then you can make a determination is this something that I have the capacity to do within my organization, or do I want to sub this out to somebody else to help me do it? Maybe I'll use talent within my company, but I'll still have somebody else take care of the X's and O's. So, you have those options available to you, and I'll walk you through ways to do it. It's not as expensive as you think. And, again, with most of the marketing budgets that a lot of design firms have, I think if you just carve out a little bit for this, a little goes a long way. So that's something to consider, and I can kind of walk you through that and talk about budgeting and what you want to spend to make this happen. So those options are certainly available to you. Now, I love this quote, and I wanted to share this with you. Rebecca Mead wrote this great article in the New Yorker about podcasting, and she said, we are living in a new golden age of storytelling in the form of the podcast. On-demand audio that a listener can download and play while commuting or exercising or, given the right equipment, showering. Now, my hand is raised right now. You can't see it, but I am guilty of listening to the podcast in the shower. And I really want to encourage you to be thinking about, how do we take advantage of this new golden age of storytelling? All of you, every organization that you represent, and even you yourselves personally have a story to tell. Okay? And podcasting is one of the best ways to do it. So I really want to encourage you to be thinking about that as you move forward and think about what that represents for you. So now, I'm going to land this plane for you so that you have all that you need. But what are the next steps? How can you move forward and get this process started? Next steps are simple. I'd like you to think about and determine your why for starting the podcast. What is it? Do you know what it is? Before you go out buying a bunch of equipment and all that, think about your why. I want you to figure out your ideal avatar / target. Hint, you could have more than one. I want you to think about, will your podcast be an external podcast, an internal podcast, or both? And actually you can do both. So that's an option for you as well. I want you to consider whether you want to internally produce the podcast, like I talked about a few slides ago, or hire a production company that will help you through the process. And then the next thing is I want you to not obsess about the equipment. Make sure you spend enough to create quality sound, and then we'll figure out the rest. But trust me when I say this, the barrier to entry to getting a decent and good podcast program off the ground is not as hard as you think. And then finally, I want you to be prepared to commit some time to this effort. This is not a one and done, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You've got to take your time putting this together and get to a place where you look forward to pressing record, because there are so many stories welling up in you. There's so many stories welling up in your organization that just need to be told, and you just need the right platform to do that. And I honestly believe that podcasting is a platform that will help you to advance the thought leadership of your organization. And I've always thought highly of the design industry. As I say, whenever I do a training, what you guys do is some of the most important work in the world. You are responsible for the built environment. You have stories, you have data, you have information that people need to hear on a regular basis. Please, please, don't relegate yourself to second class status when it comes to this. You should be at the front of the line when it comes to sharing your information. So I just want to give you a couple of other items that I think you'll find helpful with regard to equipment, because I know you're thinking, well, where do I start? If you just want to do it yourself, I've got some kits here, some things that I actually get paid on these. These are affiliate links, but they're links to all of the stuff I use. I'm looking right now where I am at thousands of dollars of sound and video equipment, what I'm using for this program right now that allows me to go back and forth between the Keynote, PowerPoint, lets me go to this look. It also lets me go to this look here where I'm kind of there, but not taking up the whole screen, because you don't want to see my face. You want to see the information. This is a program called Ecamm Live. It works well with Zoom. It works well with just about anything that you want to do to share information. If you're looking to do more Facebook Lives, or more LinkedIn Lives, which is a new thing, which I love talking about, then this is a software that really works. And just connect with me and I'll send you the information. I'll actually send you a free trial to check it out on your own. And it could really help you out, and I could walk you through using it because I love it, and it makes all the difference in the world. So there's that. And so, yeah, you have all that, and it just allows you to do a lot of different things and really go back and forth. So let's land this thing, and let me get into a couple last things I want to say. And of course, you always have YouTube to fall back on. You can always get information from them, and they can help you out. So, and answer a lot of questions that you have, and just do research on your own to kind of fill in the blanks that I may have created for you with this training. But I really want to encourage you to consider that. And then I love this quote too. In order to do something well, we must first be willing to do it badly. Your podcast is going to morph over time. And I guarantee you, anybody that has listened to the Zweig podcast or any of my podcasts can see a noticeable difference between episode 1 and episode whatever where you are. You listen to episode 1 of the Zweig podcast and episode 177, they are dramatically different, night and day. So do not despise small beginnings. Just get started. That's my advice to you. Just get going. You're not going to have all the answers. So, just focus on this and let's get this party going. So this is what I want to share with you to make sure you have this additional information. If you want to get a copy of this presentation, just go to encouragebuildgrow.com/elevate AEC. That's it. You'll get the download. You'll share your email address with me, and I'll give you what you need as far as that's concerned. Of course, if you have other questions or things of that nature, if Q&A is, we don't have Q&A because this is a replay of this right now. But if you have questions, just email me, okay? Email me or message me either on Twitter or Instagram, and I'll get right back to you with any additional guidance or help that you need to get you started with a podcast for your design firm. There's never been a better time to do it than right now. I've made my case and I rest. I'm telling you as the judge that I rest my case, Your Honor. And I hope that you see what I see, and I hope you understand some of the benefits of getting a podcast started for your organization. And even if some of you that I've spoken all over the country on podcasting, even if some of you say, maybe it's not the right time for my company, but I want to start my own personal podcast, if I can help you out, please let me know. If I can create another podcaster, I'd be more than happy to do that. So I appreciate you taking time to connect with me. That's my contact information there. Randy at encouragebuildgrow.com, on Instagram at Randy Wilburn, on Twitter at Randy Wilburn. You can reach me. And again, you can obviously, my website address is at the bottom of each of these pages of this presentation. So feel free to check it out. Reach out to me. It's real easy to get in touch. And I'll even throw my number out there if you need to call me, 479-358-7581. You can reach me anytime, day or night. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. I really appreciate you guys. I really hope you take this to heart. And whether you're the decision maker or you need to sit down with the decision maker, and if you need me to help you talk to the decision maker, hit me up. I'm your man. I'll take care of you. I'll give you all the ammunition that you need to make your case for why you guys should start a podcast. But whether you work with me or not, I'll be more than happy to give you any feedback and advice and guidance, because I just want to see more design firms tell their stories, and I think podcasting is the best way to do it. That's all I have for you today. I really appreciate you. Thank you for watching this video. Those of you that signed up and watched it live, I really appreciate you. Much love and respect. For those of you that are listening to this video on a replay, I appreciate you as well. Go download the Zweig Letter podcast, start listening to it, and start thinking about what is the podcast that I want to create for my organization. And then hit me up and we'll go from there. That's all I have. I'll see you guys soon. God bless.